Lovely. So I have a question for you first. I see a lot of women here, at least 50% women, yeah? Yes. All right, close your eyes. Trust me, I'm a mommy. Close your eyes and think of 10 elected members of parliament in Lok Sabha. Any 10. You don't have to remember it, just rifle through 10 names. Okay? Now, raise your hands if you thought of at least one woman. Okay? Maybe 10% of you. That's it. One woman, to think of one woman, right? There's more than 50% women in this audience. And it's very difficult to come up with one woman elected representative's names. And that's how programmed we are. So today we're going to talk about the tyranny of exclusion. 50% of the population and barely 10% of elected representatives. This is why you could barely think of one woman. All this got started when I made a Facebook post a few months ago. And I asked the question, why do we have so few women in politics? And I got a range of answers that got me thinking about what people really imagine is going on with women in Indian politics. One of the first answers that I got was that, women are not interested in politics. That's why you don't have women in politics. So, here is what Mr. Amit Shah announced a few months back, and here is what the AIDWA, the women's wing of the CPM, claims. The data, the reality shows that there are crores of women, party workers, across various parties in India. These are not women that have been dragged in kicking and screaming, right? These are not women that are, forced to do this. Volunteering to do political party work is like volunteering to do the dishes or a teenager's laundry. You don't do it unless you are really interested. Then came the question, yeah, maybe there are a lot of women in politics, but you know what? They're just dummy candidates or proxy candidates. They're not real independent women that want to do political work. So then you ask the question, well, if he looks like this and he's a son or a nephew, you call that dynastic politics or you call it nepotism. But if she looks like that, it becomes dummy? Is that right? How is it then when it's a male politician related, coming from a dynasty, it's nepotism? But when it's a female politician, she's a dummy. More comments, more conjectures as to why so few women in politics. And that led us to, okay, here's some facts. Just take one state in the country, and this is true of every state of that size. You have more than 25,000 elected panchayat heads, sarpanches, in Tamil Nadu. And you have 277,000 of them that are panchayat leaders over the course of 25 years of local bodies. Now multiply that by 30 states. You can take out a few because some states are much smaller than others, but you get the drift. You have crores of elected women representatives in 25 years. Crores of them. They can't all be dummy or proxy. They can't all be related to someone or the other. It's just not possible statistically. So our notions that women are dummy candidates or that women are not interested in politics when you have crores of women that have been elected and that have been governing for years is rooted in complete myth. So when you now show the evidence that there are a lot of women in politics, then comes the next comment, which is, yeah, but are they, this is what they imagine. Are they really corrupt or criminal? Are they, competent? So when they close their eyes and imagine women in politics, these are the women they imagine. And naturally so. These are very tall leaders in Indian politics. And immediately comes the comment, well, aren't many of them corrupt or criminal? They have charges against them in courts of law. So again, I ask you to close your eyes and imagine these. Do they not have charges against them? Are they not corrupt or criminal? So why is it that women, hardly 10% of elected representatives, are singled out for criminality or corruption anytime the topic comes up? In fact, it doesn't stop us from electing these same old recycled men over and over, does it? 90% of them. So what does the data actually show? Every candidate has to file an affidavit when they stand for election, declaring the cases against them. And if you look at the data that has been filed with the Election Commission for their nomination as part of their papers, as part of filing to stand for election, it shows that 2x the number of men have criminal charges against them. That means for every 100 men that stand, right, for every 100 people that stand, double the number of men have charges against them as women do, for every 100 people that stand. And corruption over the course of governance is actually 10% point less in women-governed constituencies. And this is not data that is coming from the women themselves. This is coming from a neutral body. This is coming from the UN. This is coming from the ADR. This is coming from Government of India data. So then comes a comment, okay, maybe they're less criminal, maybe they are interested, maybe they're not all dummies, but do they really have the competence to govern? Well, I'd say look around you. Is Bangalore doing great in the past 10 years? No. In the past 20 years? 30 years? Any old Bangalorean will tell you that everything has slid down, has gone down the tubes. From the garbage to the lakes, to the traffic, to the roads, to the general livability. Anyone will tell you that. It used to be that people who graduated from public schools in India, and you just heard the previous speaker, public schools in India were the creme de la creme. You had the Rajajis of the world graduate from public schools in India. And today, none of us would send our children to public schools. The government elected representatives themselves wouldn't they send their children to public schools. Public schools have dropped. Public health. God forbid you end up in a government hospital, right? So that is how competent governance is today. And for the past 70 years, it has been governed by 90% men sitting in state legislatures and parliaments. This is not to say that, men are useless at governance. It is to say that to use competence as a weapon against women is a really low blow. There's no better way of saying this. The Constitution gives us powers to vote, and the Constitution gives us powers to stand for election. And the act that allows us to do that is called the Representation of People's Act. Basically, it means if you're people of India, you can represent yourselves. You can represent yourselves. You don't need to have any more qualification to represent yourself other than you're not criminal and that you're a citizen of India, an adult. So there is value to bringing diversity of perspectives into governance like this. Why, after 70 years of independence, is so much human potential wasted on a daily basis with women walking miles to fetch water, walking kilometers to find access to a bathroom, or children walking miles to go to a school or to find a hospital? The fact is, again, from the affidavits that have been declared to the government, 53% of women are graduates, while 45% of male elected representatives are graduates. Talk about competence. In fact, the United Nations did a study of all the 4,000 plus assembly constituencies in India, all the 4,000 plus assembly constituencies, and not for a short period of time, for an entire period of 20 years across 4 election cycles. And the dots tell you all the constituencies that have been women-led at some point or the other during the 20 years. This is voluminous data. This is a study of socio-economic indicators across all of the 4,000 plus constituencies in India. And what they found was that the women-led constituencies contributed 1.8% more to the GDP of India. If any constituency was women-led at all, its economic growth was 15% points more. This is coming from the UN. Then comes the Brahmastra, right? If you show that women are not dummy or proxy candidates, they genuinely are interested in politics, they're not corrupt or criminal, then comes the question, yeah, but you know what? How can parties field women when women aren't winnable? Ultimately, the party has to field candidates who can bring home the election so that the party can form government. Can women really win? Do they have the money, given how Indian elections are? Do they have the muscle power? Are women winnable candidates? Again, the myths and the legends and the penetration of patriarchy is so deep that we don't see beyond what we want to see. What does the data tell us on this? The fact is that in 2014, just the last election, and elections are just a couple of months away now, 8% of candidates were women. Of all the candidates across India, only 8% were women. 50% of the population, 50% of the vote bank, but 8% of candidates. But 11% of the winners were women, which means that they are winning at a higher rate than they are being fielded. And who is losing? This is not one election. You pick any row on this matrix, any row at all. Every single election since the formation of this republic, since 1952, any row at all, the yellow shows you the winning percentage of men and the orange shows you the winning percentage of women. Pick any election, Lok Sabha election, and you will see that women have been winning at a much higher percentage than men. It could be as high as 3% or as high as 25%, but women have always won at a greater rate than men, although parties are not fielding them. So if the data shows that women do want to be in politics, because crores of them are political party workers, women are not dummies, women are extremely competent, they can deliver economic growth, health, education, sanitation. There are studies that show that while the male panchayat leaders focus on construction and cement, it actually ironically says 3 C's, construction, cement, and corruption. The female leaders focus on health, education, sanitation. It is not to say that they're not corrupt or criminal, they're just less so according to the data. And if they are so competent, what is going on? Why do we not have women in parliament and women in legislatures when they are actually being elected? It is very apparent from the data that voters want women, want to vote for women, are willing to vote for women at a greater rate than they are voting for men. So what's going wrong here? And indeed, if you look at India compared to the rest of the world, this is where India stands. It actually slipped down in the past couple of years, in 2014, from 148th to 151st in the order of countries in the percentage of women in parliament. You have countries that have been ravaged by civil wars like Rwanda or Sudan, way above us. Rwanda has 64% women in parliament. You have countries like Pakistan that are dubiously democratic. You have countries like Bangladesh and Nepal, our own neighbors, that are ahead of us. Afghanistan, can you believe it? And then, of course, you have the Western, more advanced democracies, the UK, the France, that are ahead of us. Each and every one of these countries has something unique that they do about ensuring that diversity and perspective of representation. You see, democracy is all about representation, is all about people's voices. And my voice is not the voice of a Muslim woman. My voice is not the voice of a farmer. My voice is not the voice of a Dalit male. So it is impossible for me to know how they grow up, what issues they face, and therefore what laws and policies need to be made that ensure inclusive growth in the country. So you have to have people representing themselves and their own kinds of issues in order to bring those diversity of perspectives into lawmaking and policy making. Therefore, all of these countries have done something that India hasn't. If we need to understand why that is so, we've got to stare at this data. In panchayats and municipal corporations, today we have a third to 60% women. But in state assemblies and parliament, we have barely 10% women. What's the difference? Anyone can tell what the difference is? There's reservations. Every country that you saw on the previous chart either has reservations in parliament and legislatures or party quotas. What is going on in India is simply that while voters want to vote for women, parties only want women's votes. They're not fielding women as candidates. Recently, a national anchor, actually yesterday, and one of the most well-known national anchors on India Today, told me that he was at the Lok Sabha covering the historic tabling of the Women's Reservation Bill, in the early 90s. The Rajya Sabha had passed it, and the Lok Sabha didn't pass it, and it's been languishing for a couple of decades now. And he was actually outside the Lok Sabha when all the ruckus was happening. There was a walkout and there was a washout, while the ruling party was trying to make sure that it got passed, and many of the coalition representatives were agreed that it should get passed, and they agreed to vote for it. But then many walked out and it didn't get passed. The key point that he was trying to make is this. He was outside the Lok Sabha, and one of the most well-known ministers of the then ruling UPA 1 came by and he said, and the anchor asked him, what happened in Parliament? And he said, you know, of course we support the Women's Reservation Bill in public, but why would I want to give up my seat for a woman? So what that's telling, because this is exactly what's happening that has brought us to this pass, which is that forget a 10-year challenge, 20-year challenge, it's 70-year challenge that year after year after year, general election after general election, parties only field 8% women. Right? Is the harvest going to come through this time in 2019? There is something about fielding far less than 10% women that parties have not been accommodating women candidates at all, that you see so many rebel candidates. All these women get frustrated and stand as independents. And unfortunately, India doesn't have a track record of electing independents. It's not about being a woman. India elects 1.4% independents. Of all the candidates that stand, 1%, 1.5% get elected as independents. So what do? I think the key is the we. As I was saying, that in a democracy, it's the aggregation of voices that counts. If you look at the Gandhian who died recently fighting for the Ganga to be cleaned, or if you look at Iram Sharmila, who fasted for decades asking to repeal the AFSPA, it didn't happen. It was tragic because theirs were very powerful but singular voices. And in a democracy, the only thing that gets heard is the aggregation of voices. Every community in India, a religious community, every caste in India has its own aggregation of voices because they know, for right, for wrong, that their problems are unique. The society is built in such a way that a set of people have unique problems. It's like the parents of, Aditi students. We have our own unique issues, we have our own unique advantages, we have our own unique problems to solve, the set of Aditi teachers. And the same way, a set of people from a different business people. They have the FICCI and the CII. They get together to say, we're going to demand rules and regulations, policy changes, tax codes that benefit businesses. And that's the same way for women. The we here is the women to say, if we don't get together to fight for what we want, for political power to women, it is never going to happen. India is one of those unique democracies where women didn't have to fight for suffrage. We just got it. We were enfranchised because of the vision of our constituent assembly, because of the vision of Ambedkar and the other constitution makers that gave us the right to vote and the right to stand on day one. But while the right to vote has materialized, the right to stand has not materialized. There's actual physical impediments to making that happen. So unless we band together and fight for it, it is not going to happen. So Shakti is a non-partisan group. It's a citizen movement that has come together to say, we must get 50% election tickets for women. We must support women candidates. The real alternative to reforming this country is with women. Because you now have governance, policy, and lawmaking that is completely not influenced by 50% of the population. That perspective, that input is completely absent from governance. What Shakti has done in the past just 1.5 months of formation is that women and right-thinking men from all over the country as a citizen movement have got together, and we simultaneously called, in a period of 2 hours, we called all the 543 members of parliament while the parliament was in session. The winter session just ended. While the parliament was in session, we called at the end of the day 543 MPs, of which we were able to reach 130, and we asked 127 of them said yes to table the Women's Reservation Bill in Parliament. You don't need Women's Reservation Bill if the parties themselves give 50% tickets. In fact, many, many countries have party quotas where parties must give 50% tickets to women or 33% tickets to women. In fact, the Election Commission in India recommended that a decade ago, saying it will withdraw support to parties, not recognize parties that don't give 50% tickets to women. Unfortunately, that never got made into law. And it's amazing because 127 MPs said yes, and they actually did raise it in Parliament, but they were not allowed to discuss it. So Shakti believes that this business, every time you go to vote, of people saying, you know, does it make any difference who I vote for? Bangalore's traffic is going to be exactly the same. There's still going to be droughts in certain parts of the country. Farmers are still going to commit suicide. What difference does it make who you vote for? Well, don't vote the same old recycled men. There are always women candidates, if not fielded by the parties, and very few are fielded by the parties, there are independent candidates. Perhaps the alternative is with women. Perhaps the alternative is to fight for parties to give more tickets to women. Vote her. We need to truly create a women's vote bank in this country, because it is ridiculous to have a democracy where 50% of the population is not represented. So this is our goal, is to get the right to stand. And as the previous speaker said, it is not just that women must rescue themselves, it is that women must rescue this country. Thank you very much.